Dina Castillo, and I'm very excited to be here this evening with the wonderful Shinique Smith, one of our artists, and we'll be running through a number of her works and a number of themes that kind of develop along the course of her career that kind of are very prevalent throughout her practice. And these are the themes of biography and autobiography, reflection, and memory. And so this is Shinique.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming.
So
I didn't get up much. Oh, am I muted?
No.
We hear you fine.
Okay, great.
Okay. And so I'd like to begin by introducing Shinique before we jump into the conversation. So Shinique is a multimedia artist who works across a variety of media, including clothing, textiles, and personal belongings to construct sculptures, paintings, and site-specific installations. And these works examine the ways in which objects resonate on a personal and social scale, revealing their connections across time and place to suggest the possibility of constructing new worlds. And Shanique's her works have been exhibited in a number of institutions, and they're included in the permanent collections of institutions, including the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Barnes Museum, the Brooklyn Museum, the Bronx Museum, the Contemporary Art Center in New Orleans, the Denver Art Museum, the Kemper Museum, the Minneapolis Art Institute, MoCA North Miami, MoMA PS1, MFA Boston, many institutions, the National Portrait Gallery, the New Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Whitney Museum, among many, many others. Really a wonderful selection of institutions, really wonderful shows at these places as well. And Shinique was born in Baltimore and currently lives and works in Los Angeles. So without further ado, I'm gonna, I guess, begin the talk. Let's lead into this conversation, and by jumping into one of the first theme, I guess you could say. And your works are quite autobiographical in nature. They refer to your past, either directly or indirectly through evocations, I guess you could say, of different memories or points in your life. And I think it's very appropriate to begin with this work, Daughter of the Chief, an early work from 2007, and as an entry point into your career and into this theme of biography in your practice. So perhaps, can you tell us a bit about this work, this point in your career, in fact, as well, and then maybe the ideas that you were exploring during this time and how they developed across the trajectory of your practice through now.
Okay. Well, I think that the idea of autobiography, as well as portraiture in general, is pervasive in my practice, but not every piece is a self-portrait. Some of them, I guess, are more pointed towards me and my memories and the use of personal objects. I incorporate a lot of my own things into all of my works, but like this particular work, at this point in my practice and the time in my life, this piece was 2007. I was having my, I guess, second solo show at the time, and experimenting with incorporating installation into paintings, pairing objects, and creating relationships that referred to my domestic situation. So this particular piece incorporated my denim jeans on the side and my studio shoes. I wore a lot of Chuck Taylors for most of my life. And also this plant, which was from a cutting from a huge tree that I had in my place at the time, in a Snapple bottle, which I was also addicted to at the time. It's called Daughter of the Chief because my mother is actually a chief, considered a chief in Fiji years ago. She's part of a council of indigenous elders, and we've traveled the world doing ceremony and sharing prophecy with elders all over the world. And my mom was named a chief in Fiji because of some familial ancestral ties there. And I have a Fijian name, which means daughter of the chief. So it's kind of a place and time in my life that this piece is. You use the word invocation, and I think that's part of it. But beyond that, I also think in terms of composition. You know, I'm trying to balance the personal with the overall.
Of course. And I think something that's really interesting to me in this work in particular, kind of looking at it, kind of the physicality of it, it's a piece that kind of incorporates this installation element, like you mentioned, but there's this kind of, and I think you do it a lot in your later works, where your objects kind of thrust themselves outside of the picture plane. And I kind of almost see that as an extension of this, perhaps, where you're kind of like bringing them, I don't know, within the frame of the work. I'm not sure if that's something that maybe developed out of including these kinds of objects kind of off to the side of a canvas, for example, because it's in relation to the canvas, but it's not part of the picture plane. So I find that relationship really interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, you know, now that we're talking about it, and because, you know, I chose several images for this that related to self-portraiture, but the idea of shoes and placing shoes next to things, I have been doing for a while. And I think it did start that year with an installation that I did at the National Portrait Gallery, which isn't in our slideshow. I mean, I could pull it up and try to show it to you guys. But I had these impossible and completely uncomfortable sneaker high heels. They were like really popular for a minute. And they were pink with like a white sneaker lug sole, but they were, you know, like sandal high heels, and they had like fake crystal chains on them. I took those shoes and I bundled them together and added, you know, I bundled them actually with a scrunchie and some faux flowers. It became a small sculpture unto itself. And I have this huge installation that was calligraphy on the wall and images of hip hop stars that had passed away in my lifetime. And I placed this little pair of shoes in the corner. And why I did that, I don't know. I mean, it felt like a hip hop moment. It felt like a feminine gesture. It felt like an exclamation point that a woman made that piece, that particular piece. And I guess I keep doing it. It's almost like an exclamation, you know, like the period on the end of a gesture. But I mean, living in Brooklyn also at the time, I had taken a lot of pictures of people leave shoes out to give away. And there were several times that I happened upon a pair of shoes just like the ones I was wearing, a pair of Chuck Taylors covered in snow, you know, looking like someone had just walked out of them. And so I think a lot about shoes as like a basic need and something that we take for granted. There's a lot of shoes are loaded.
Now that we're on the topic, of these kinds of personal artifacts and shoes in particular, is there a particular type of object that you feel is particularly charged? Like you use clothes a lot, for example, and I feel that perhaps part of that, like kind of being close to the body, is perhaps part of what charges an object as feeling particularly personal. Because you mentioned your jeans in this piece and shoes in a work like this, and then shoes in here as well, for example, in a work that's
right.
9 years later. Yeah, so perhaps perhaps there's something about clothing that we wear as close to our bodies? Or is that what you feel is what charges an object? Or I suppose, how do you select the objects? How do you decide to give this article of clothing or this object to the work?
Okay. Hold on a minute. Okay. So first are there particular objects that I like to use that are charged in a particular way? And then it was about clothing. So let me recap. Clothing and closeness to the body, and why I may use that as a material. I'm just paraphrasing. Okay. Yes, there are objects that are, like have a broad spectrum and loaded nature. Shoes are really loaded. I mean, from the films that, of the Holocaust, seeing piles of shoes, piles of clothing and things taken away. I think from that moment, shoes became really synonymous with that, and with a kind of memorial or requiem in some way, because there's no one in them. And for a long time, I didn't want to use shoes in any way, because I felt like they were too loaded. And when I do use them, they have a specific color and pattern and compositional aesthetic relationship to the overall piece that I'm making. And they have also mostly a reference to me when I do use them. I don't use them often, let's just say. And clothing, not just because it's worn close to the body, but that's one of them, that a body could inhabit them or had inhabited these garments. I also use fabric. I think clothing and fabric are one of, again, a basic need, but also I'm attracted to it as one of the first art forms that we created as human beings, and how intrinsic it is to the experience of being human. What you have, what you don't, what makes you feel stylish, what makes you feel like you belong. In the beginning, I was very drawn to those kind of Western ideals that are placed on garments, and the exportation and consumption of clothing. How it's manufactured overseas, worn here, and then shipped back overseas and purchased by sometimes people who may have manufactured the same clothes. There is it connects us as people, and jeans is one of them. It's, there are a couple of fabrics, I could go on about this forever, that are universal and that people trick out and use in, they personalize them. Cowboys wore denim, rappers wear denim, socialites wear, Brooke Shields with the Calvin Klein ad. There's the high and low, and this convergence of culture and style and meaning is interesting to me.
Well, I think that's interesting that you talk about the kind of universalization or the universal experience of clothing, like something like denim, which can be, very high end, very low end. Everyone, has likely worn at some point or come into contact with a pair of jeans, So the experience of that is quite universal, like you mentioned. And I think maybe bringing this back to perhaps something that just came to mind in your practice, and perhaps if it's fine, I might just jump ahead to something. Well, so perhaps this one. I feel that you, in your latest body of work, or in the last year, you created a number of works where you universalize this idea of memory you kind of create these personal memory moments, I guess you could say, that you draw into these pieces. And then there are others that kind of are very, that are more evocative, perhaps something that we might all experience, like a first kiss, for example, or a memory like that, that's not necessarily specific to you, but that we could all sort of take away from. And I think that there's this interesting connection, I think, in your use of textile and then creating these kind of universal moments, using textile, using objects. This work, for example, has like a hat in it that we might all experience, but then we also have these evocations of these more kind of universal memories or feelings or moments.
I'm sorry, you didn't ask me a question.
I guess I'm trying.
I don't know what to say.
Of course, sorry, I kind of rambled. I wanted to perhaps draw a connection between your use of textile. You talked about, denim, for example, being a universal material, and your playing with these universal qualities of memory, how we may all not have the exact same memory of a particular type of thing, but we all share in similar kinds of memories, like a first kiss, for example, or that kind of thing. So I just wanted to draw that connection and perhaps ask if that's something that you feel is evoked through your use of these kind of universal materials, universal textiles, things that we might all experience, that you bring in, for example, like a hat that we might all recognize.
Yes and no. I think that I create a language with the materials that I'm projecting meaning onto that viewers may not necessarily read exactly as I have. And like I was saying before, I balance that personal impulse or my own nostalgia or sentimentality or romance with objects and memory, with form and the ways that these objects function as elements. And that's part of why I like using them. They're stand-ins for color. They bring in pattern that I don't have to invent, that pre-exists, but then may be relative to something else. So this particular piece, I'm not the one sharing it, but like in the upper portion to the left of the hat, well, show the hat.
Maybe zoom in, yeah.
Yeah, so that is kind of a Kango style hat, rain hat that has a nebula on it. And I guess sometimes I'm into how I'm creating a space and I'm creating microcosms, and I will use things that reference actual cosmic things. And then where you're to the left here with the purple patterned circle is a mouse pad. So they're like common things. I think there's also, I keep thinking I'm controlling this. I keep reaching for it.
Just let me know, and I'm happy to move around.
There's a black circle down to here. That's a shoulder pad from a jacket. So I like that when things have multiple meanings and multiple functions within a work. Maybe I overcomplicate things for myself. I create a puzzle where I can balance chaos and multiple elements and meanings and bring them into a harmony through gesture, through tying, through the use of calligraphy, color. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think you definitely did. I mean, bringing in these elements like hats and shoulder pads, I think is very related to this kind of drawing us into this, I guess you could say, this chaos by helping us to pinpoint, right, these objects that are familiar to us. So you're kind of creating order from all of these elements, and we can find places that we can kind of ground ourselves within through these recognizable moments in your work.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. Wait, you should write that down. Well, we're recording this, right?
We're recording.
Because exactly that, because I feel for me, I feel that I ground myself in this crazy chaos of a world within the miasma of what's going on around us now and previously, and balance that with my own inner world and memory and past. I use the work for that, and so I'm kind of, you know, there are operation systems in place geometrically, you know, compositionally, that bring things into harmony, but everything goes crazy and then it comes back to balance, and I balance myself through my work. And perhaps, you know, like we were saying, I'm constructing worlds. I'm taking this big chaos, elements from this big chaos, and squishing it into this frame or a bundle or a canvas.
And you were something very interesting earlier. You mentioned that, you know, your use of things like clothing and shoes, it's because they're needs, they're these necessities. And I feel that there's, I guess, a connection here too, this kind of need to create order for yourself, right, from the chaos. It's like a kind of bringing these objects in to that are themselves needs to kind of fulfill this particular need of bringing these things together in a way that's cohesive and understandable. And I think that's a very interesting.
And sometimes, let's just say, sometimes I don't exactly get there.
Yeah.
I strive for the balance. I strive for joy, because I feel like joy is something that's hard won. It's not happiness. It's not fun. It's the other side of pain, where you've distilled all the things, and it's for better word, like it's just is, you know. But I don't always get to either place. You know, I'm striving for it, and you might feel a tension between that.
For sure. So I think this could be a good. I think this could be a good jumping off point to our next kind of major theme, which is perhaps a theme of reflection. Okay. Or we can go back to another work if you'd like to talk about a particular work that we.
No, that's okay. Let's go back to the first image of. Oh,
this one?
Where did? Oh, is that the first image?
Yes, I was going backwards through the slideshow, but I can go forward.
Okay. Oh.
This one. No. We can go here.
Yeah, that one.
Okay. So reflection is another one of the major themes in your work. You know, and I guess reflection in terms of kind of considering things, mulling them over, making order out of chaos, right? But you also use reflective surfaces, mirrors, that kind of thing in your practice. And there's an interesting effect that the use of reflection kind of elicits in your work, in that, you know, it's constantly shifting. You know, as the viewer moves around a space, the work itself kind of shifts, reflects different things. And so let's, I guess, speak about this particular project that I'm also very interested to learn about, that I don't know that much about. And it's Quickening, which is this installation that you did in 2016 at the Jacksonville, this large scale installation. And you can kind of get a sense of scale here with the people off to the side. And then there's, we'll talk about the aerial list maybe a little later, but you can get a sense of how large it is for those who haven't seen it. And can you tell us perhaps a bit about this work and your use of reflective surfaces in here?
Okay. One other thing, yes, I can. Thank you. This piece is called Quickening, and I had started to use mirror, acrylic mirror, glass mirror, before painting on it as a surface and casting light to create light and shadow in other works. But I wanted you to show this particular image because I feel like it has also a relationship to the painting that's right before it. If you could just flip back.
Just go straight forward in this option. There we go.
If you see how the bundles are balanced in space, I'm kind of doing the same sort of compositional arrangement in that painting. So trying to give the same spatial relationship as this. And so things like this, I feel like I go from the micro to the macro, and I compose elements, whether they're 3D or 2D, in a similar fashion. But I started to use a mirror so that it would reflect. We could go forward, Claudia, so that it would reflect light. I don't know if you can see that on the left image on the floor, the mirror is casting reflections. So on one hand, it's capturing all the color in the room, but it's also shifting according to the light. This piece is in an atrium that has a huge skylight. So the light shifts and the reflection moves across the room. I like the fluid and potential that reflective surfaces have. I sometimes, I guess I first started using, I found these chrome hubcaps when I was in residency at Skowhegan. My friends and I went to Quebec and went to some.
There's a hubcap in this piece.
There's a hubcap in that one, but it's not the one I'm talking about. Yeah. But hubcaps, flattened cans, things like that. Appear in my work. But I like this dome because it takes in the whole room, but it contorts space, and it reminded me of old master paintings that incorporated mirror in the background. So anyway, I started using mirror to cast light. And for this piece, I started to paint then on and collage on the mirror. So it's a 40-foot wall. I painted the background. There's a geometry drawn onto the background that all the mirrored elements fit into. And I also did a collaboration with an aerialist, which I wanted to do forever. So it was awesome. Tempest Halstead out of Jacksonville, super strong and elegant woman, became one of the bundles basically in the air. There's a video. I don't know if it's on my website, but we'll share it with you guys if you want to see it. We'll put it up. But so off and on throughout, I've been, incorporating mirror into a work in a small way, or now in much larger ways. And I think there's a more recent piece where I've taken the installation, this type of mirror into, you want to show the memories?
I'll go forward to, there we are.
Just into this piece. Oh, into this piece, and you can also, so this is a 7-paneled work. I often, in order to make something larger, I will create multiple elements that accumulate into a larger work. It's easier for me to move around and to be flexible. So it breaks into 7 panels so that I could actually move them around and change the composition as I was going. I started it on the floor. But so you can see that the mirror is casting reflections on the ground here. And I like that. I like this above and below reference that it moves into the room while it's also taking in the room as compositional and color elements. This particular piece reminded me, because of its length and the landscape, it's like a narrative, and the collage bits and the calligraphy that I was using reminded me of the 80s when I was in high school and riding the bus to school from the west side of Baltimore to downtown to Baltimore School for the Arts, and how you would see yourself reflected in a window, or the bus go, reflected in, the side of a building, and then sometimes catch your own reflection in the bus window. And that fragmented experience of catching a glimpse of yourself as you move through a landscape, through an urban landscape. So that's why it's titled Memories of My Youth Streak By on the 23. And I referred to that time in my life often as a time of, coming of age, and also when I did write graffiti, and that my friends and that excitement of my youth and development as an artist are really informative. So reflection.
Yes, reflection, definitely. And I also wanted to maybe just ask a little bit about the process of making, just going back to quickening very quickly, because you talked about breaking down, work, this long work like Memories of My Youth into 7 panels. How did you work on this particular piece? Because the strokes are so gestural, they look so fluid. It looks like you just did a huge hand motion and made the line, but obviously you couldn't do that at this scale.
I did.
You did.
I did. I oh gosh, what's his name? He's so cool. One of the art handlers for the space ran the lift while I created the gestures, and there were marks that we were at the top, and I said, "Okay, go," and he slowly moved the lift down, and I moved across, like walked back and forth, making the mark as the lift went down the wall.
I think that's spectacular.
So I try to be and it's intuitive.
Yes.
If there wasn't a sketch other than the mirrored elements, because they were pre-cut, and I created a geometry that they fit into, and there are multiple pieces that can be handled, about 3 feet by 8 feet. Sometimes they're long, but that way I could move them around on tables, and I could paint on them and collage on them, and then bolt them to the wall. But underneath was all freestyle.
Amazing. More
2 days. 2 days.
More.
One day of really going at it. Another day I come back and I edit. If something, because I think it's important to note that if something doesn't work, I'll go back and paint it out. I have to give myself a day to edit. I can't just I go willy-nilly, woohoo, but then it's all about editing.
There's something there, coming back to, order out of chaos, kind of breaking things down where, all of that into its component parts, and kind of making, finding a structure, finding a system. So I think that's kind of an interesting, like pervasive, perhaps, like theme as well throughout your work, is you kind of orchestrating this chaos from order, from this, very methodological, I guess you could say a much more structured place.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think
it ties it all together.
So I think as well, just looking at the aerialist, for example, and you're referring to you in the lift kind of being kind of moved around this wall so you can create these gestures. I wanted to as well perhaps ask you briefly about the concept of movement in your work, because these lines are so infused with energy, and you've spoken about this in the past, but perhaps you can elaborate a bit for people who might not know from our audience here. You've talked about the influence of these gestures from calligraphy, from graffiti culture, and perhaps you can speak to this idea of motion and how you kind of produce that in your work and where it comes from? And I'm not sure if perhaps you can.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, you know, because it's different. Motion is different from my hand. You know, graffiti, calligraphy, and years of drawing lessons, you know, like school, informed my hand. But also dance. I took ballet from when I was 4 to high school. And so dance is in my body, and movement is in my body. And from there, you know, off and on, besides dance, yes, ballet came in and out of my life, dance came in and out of my life, but I also studied different forms of martial arts, Aikido and Tai Chi, and I studied fencing, French foil, and Japanese sword, Butado, and Tai Chi sword. So, and the sword, those sword movements are akin to the gesture of a brush. And I think all those things come into the way, they inform the way I move. And so that's why the pieces move like that. And also, I guess, I perceive, on the other hand, that's my body and how I affect materials. But then the way I perceive reality is I perceive it all in motion. Like, we're sitting here and this is a static screen right here, and this is moving back here, and your head's moving, and I hear helicopters outside on Washington Boulevard, but this planet is moving, and the planets around it are moving. I mean, we're in constant state of motion. It doesn't feel like it, but I kind of feel everything moving, you know, the waves of energy, and I guess try to flow with it, and that's part of what I don't know, I guess movement makes my work alive, if I could say that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm just looking at the piece behind your shoulder right now. It looks like this wave, and you talk about this wave of motion, and I think that, you know, that's a perfect example, because that's that piece right there. You can point towards that, and it's you can see it very clearly. Exactly.
But that's the thing, everything moves in a wave. The idea of a straight line is an illusion. You know, you learn that in drawing school when you learn perspective. You know?
Exactly.
And so I guess that's part of why I don't necessarily render anymore, because my work was that, and I love work that is figurative and you know, of life, but I also felt like I was creating an illusion. And as much as, like, you know, abstraction may be an illusion, it felt more like how things naturally move. I don't know. I shouldn't even say that out loud. It could sound crazy.
I don't think it is. I think that it's, I don't know, it comes through, I think, in your practice, this kind of, I don't know, trying to evoke this feeling of swirling motion. And I think it's kind of throughout your work. I think maybe, especially in something like this.
Yeah.
And then maybe let's come to the final theme of memory. We talked a bit about already, sorry, let's move forward. Memories of my youth streak by Anna 23.
Okay.
We have some interesting process shots that we didn't get through, and I think that these process questions are just so interesting to me, just to hear a bit about your process. And you mentioned kind of how it began on the floor.
Yeah. There's my cat.
And here are some selfies of you in the piece, kind of reflected.
So yeah, like I said, it began on the floor. I use mop brushes, and sometimes I make my own brushes this is, at the beginning of the year, or end of last year, I was making ink. I started making inks, and I guess during quarantine, I started making, anyway, I started making a black for myself, a mixture of things. And so it started on the floor where I could, move freely with a huge brush and then stand it up and see how it flowed and move the panels around. If something's not working, I will just paint over it and start again sometimes, because there's not a lot of backing up with this. Sometimes you can finesse it or just cover it up, I guess. Anyway, but it starts with the line. It started with, gesture, with words, abstracted language, and black, which I always come back to. I come back to drawing, and I come back to black, because black is everything and nothing at the same time. It is blackness in terms of my culture and identity, but it is also how we first wrote script. It's primordial, ink, ash, charcoal from the fire, it is written, it feels concrete, so I use black and white a lot, and I use black to write and create gesture that moves through my work. And then I applied some new elements of mirror that I had been working on. I'd wanted to make another mirrored piece, and then I played with how that could be juxtaposed with the calligraphy, and how it broke it up. It kind of breaks up the flow, but it continues to flow. And I like that difference, that hard edge of that material is cool, and it's machine cut next to the gestural brushwork. So I moved those around and I added onto them. And then also, I don't know if we have a detail that shows it, but I went back in with pencil and ballpoint pen in areas and drew. Oh, there's a little bit that you can see, in there. I went back in and I drew in areas. So there's a lot of nuance. Like I said before, the macro and the micro, sometimes that's within one piece where you have the overall, but then when you come in there's a lot of different stories to move you through along the piece.
Lots of different moments. You can see more of the.
Oh, there's some. Yeah. So for me, I always, like I said, I would come back to a point in time in my life where also beyond, being an informative time, it was also inspiring in terms of my hands. Right? So I use sometimes reference to my bedroom wall or a diary, journaling, composition notebooks, things like that in the work. So that's it. That's memories of my youth streaking by, reminding me of the 23 bus and beyond. It's also like a kind of cosmic anomaly moving through space.
Sure. I received a few questions actually over the course of our talk, so maybe we could answer a few of those. We have about maybe 10 minutes, so that'd be great to maybe address a few of them. So I got a question, what inspires the titles of your works? And as we went through, this one, for example, Memories of My Youth, Streak by the 23. So that's a kind of very poetic title. I guess I would agree with that.
Yes. I would say that most of my titles are poetic. I go through a process of naming things, like there, and secretly Night danced with her, because to me the for this particular piece, the gesture, the way that the brush marks were moving took on a character. It felt like two people dancing, and I had this vision, and this is after the fact, right? After making it, I had this vision of being outside at night dancing, and how Night would be could be a dark figure, but also, you know, a loving kind of cosmic, mysterious, but not necessarily, you know, the idea of night dancing. And that's why it's capitalized. I love this piece. You see at the bottom, there's a TJ Maxx shopping bag with a floral pattern there. Yeah, I love this piece. And up top, the two kind of star-like elements, those are appliques for belly dancers, boob covering.
Wonderful. They're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous.
Thanks. But I go through a process of naming the work and thinking in terms of the visual elements and the energy that it's evoking, because I think a title adds to that.
For sure. And I received another question as well. Why did you start making art, and when did you realize that you're an artist?
I think I didn't have a choice. I did get pushed a little in that direction, but my mother tells me that when I was 5, I told her I'm an artist. Not a girl or a boy or whatever. I would say I'm an artist. I didn't know what an artist was. I don't know if she's just telling me that or not, but I've always had that kind of interest. And then I think it became real when I auditioned and was accepted to high school for the arts. And then, you know, it became an actual thing beyond just drawing, you know. But I definitely received encouragement from my mom. She saw what I was, you know, compelled towards and encouraged me. And she was, you know, she's a creative person herself. She was designing clothes and painting herself and drawing. So I was always around fabric, actually. Not a surprise that I'm making work with fabric.
And I received one final question, actually. If anyone has any others, please feel free to chat me directly. Is there a particular process? I guess you kind of maybe talked about that a bit, but is there a particular process or structure that Shinique, or rather you, follow when you create works? Or is that different work to work? I guess, do you have like a starting off point that you maybe have for each piece, or
yeah,
does that change?
It changes from piece to piece. Mostly it can begin with an object, a color, or a word, one gesture, one word, and then it builds from there. It's an accumulative process, even within something that's a singular piece. It keeps building and, you know, adding, taking away. But I begin with a gesture, with a thought, with a word, and a color, like I have this thing, I want to make something with it. The shirt, those shoes, or whatever. And then it builds or it doesn't. Sometimes, I mean, most of the time I have an idea and it morphs into something completely different at the end. And I like that. I like not knowing. I like to be surprised. I like to, my practice is really about giving myself the freedom to have a sense of discovery. So I'm discovering where the piece is going in the process of making, and hopefully that piece is infused with that energy of discovery. It's not static, planned out.
I think that, yeah, it goes hand in hand with you kind of revealing worlds, creating order, kind of looking to the essential, right? I think you mentioned that before, just the focus on black and white, on needs. And I think that kind of really comes through. There's just almost like elemental quality, I guess you could say, that's kind of at the base of these works. I think it's really well articulated. I think it's really gorgeous how you bring all of those things together.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a huge fan of your work, so I'm very excited that we had the chance to speak with you this evening. So thank you so much, Shinique, for making the time and talking a bit about your practice with all of us. Perhaps is there anything you'd like to add at the end before we say goodbye for the night?
No, thank you for having me and for all your interest in my work. Please check out the David Castillo OVR.
Yes,
Claudia will give you the details. You can see some of my work there, and DM me if you have any more questions.
Wonderful. Yes, Shinique Smith, her work is part of our online virtual exhibition, part of the viewing room platform for Art Basel this year. We have 2 pieces of hers on view, and one of them is Memories of My Youth, street by on the 23, and the other one is Ambrosia, which I will show you as well, which we didn't get to talk about, unfortunately.
I love that piece too.
Another wonderful piece. So if you'd like to learn more about those works, please check out our website, CastilloGallery.com, or Shanique's website. And yes, of course, look at the virtual viewing room on the Art Basel platform. So thank you so much for joining us this evening, Shinique and everyone else, and have a good night.
Thank you, Claudia, for your wonderful questions.
Thank you, Shinique.